Yo, Jackplex, answer the fucking phone, dude.
We're going to be talking about the fact that your father had gotten arrested for the possession of child pornography, right?
Yes.
Do you know if he distributed this or he just was in the possession of it?
As far as we and the police know, it's just the possession of it. It was 10 charges of possession.
So, something that I've realized pretty recently with all these episodes is that these episodes are kind of like moments in time. Like, this is the first time you and I are really speaking because we're strangers. So,
Yes.
This is not only like I guess an interview, it's more of like a conversation, I think, with every person that I have. So when you have this conversation, we're both gonna have like this like moment in time. And you recently found out about this, right?
Yeah, I found out in September of last year.
And if God allows us both to live, you know, you'll live to have children and then you can show them this. Like, what are you hoping to like get out of this conversation for yourself?
I mean, it definitely helps to kind of verbalize it and talk about it. I've realized that keeping it in makes it a whole lot worse. Personally, I think this would help just to talk about it and rationalize it with somebody, even though I've done that in therapy once a week. Also, I have realized that I know I'm not the only one who's gone through this, there's no way, but there's not a lot of people who actually talk about it because, I mean, even though it's not you, it's a very embarrassing thing for somebody that you're related to be associated with this kind of stuff. So it does feel like, even though you have family and friends to support you, it does feel very alone, and that there's not many people who talk about it. So I hope that if somebody else is going through this, maybe that they will hear this and know that they're definitely not the only one who's been through this.
I think that sometimes when we hear of like these events and stories, it's a little bit difficult for us to like kind of put ourselves in that person's shoes, just because there's just so much going on in each person's lives. Even, let's take for example, you have an uncle or an aunt that gets arrested every now and then. That's still going to affect how your grandparents feel, how your parents feel. It's going to have like an effect, like a ripple effect. And these are small things, like, okay, not small things, but these are things that are like, I feel like there's a moral line between, let's say, you know, somebody who murdered, raped, or did something like that, and then there's like theft and like fraud.
Oh yeah.
I definitely feel like this thing here crosses that line almost all the way over.
Oh, 100%.
How do you describe the feeling that you're feeling knowing that someone who's related to you, knows you, did this?
I mean, I felt about 100 things since I found out. I think the most remarkable ones are definitely anger and disgust. But it's very interesting being his daughter because you obviously have that anger and disgust where you're like, I cannot believe that my dad did this. Pissed at him because of what he did. And then you have the part where, well, that's still my dad. Like, he still did raise me. So it's very much kind of competing with each other, whether or not you're angry or if you miss him and you want to forgive him. So there's a lot of emotions going on around that, for sure.
I had a conversation with a guy whose father was a serial killer, had murdered. I feel like the difference here is that he did not know his father that well personally, but
Right.
it still had that ripple effect where he found out about him later, and I'll leave it at that in terms of that episode. But here, there seems to be a sort of like connection that you and your father at least had in some form. I'm kind of curious as to your relationship with your father before even had found out that this had happened. How would you describe your relationship and your history with him?
We had a decent relationship. My parents are actually divorced. They divorced when I was like 7 or 8. So for a while I was going back and forth to their houses. So I would be at my dad's house for 1 week and then my mom's house for 1 week. And I wouldn't say I had the best relationship with my dad, but it was fairly decent. He had a wife, my stepmother. She was actually very, very verbally abusive towards me, and he pretty much stood by her. There would be occasions where he would be like, hey, you know, stop, like, this isn't okay, like, this is crossing a line, but for the majority of the time, it was kind of, he stood by her, that was his wife. So that definitely strained our relationship. And actually for the year prior to me finding out, so for that year, I actually hadn't been going over to his house. I had just been with my mom full time. And so I would occasionally see him, you know, we went to a concert together. It wasn't the best relationship by any means, but I had been relatively close with my dad prior. You know, we'd go to concerts and we'd go out to dinner and stuff like that, even when I wasn't at his house full time. So it wasn't the best relationship, but I was fairly close with him. He wasn't an absent dad by any means. So it definitely did make it a little bit harder because I had been around my dad a lot my whole life, so.
Do you have any siblings?
I don't. I had 2 stepbrothers from my stepmom, obviously. But no, I don't have any. Well, I have a sibling now. My mom actually had a baby 5 months ago. Not with my dad, but with somebody else. But on my dad's side, no siblings, anything like that.
You're the only one with the perspective of being his daughter, his blood daughter.
Yes.
I would also like to ask, and I mean, I'm pretty sure the answer would be no, but did you in any way, shape, or form see this coming?
So my first instinct answer to that would be no, but actually when I found out, there was one specific moment that was kind of like, okay, this kind of makes sense. I actually, years and years prior to this, I was pretty young, maybe 12, 13. My dad was showing me something on a computer in his office. He actually worked in IT, and he called me into his office to show me something. And on the little bookmarked tabs on Google, on that taskbar thing, there was a chat site that I had actually been on. It was like a stupid teen chat website that was definitely unsafe, that I should not have been on that age, because I was definitely like pedo central. And so I had seen that and I was like, holy shit. And I pushed that so far back because the fear of, oh my God, what if my dad had like been on there at the same time I was, that was like an overwhelming fear of mine. So I had pushed that back, but when I found out about what happened, I was like, oh my God, was he doing this like all along? So part of me a little bit could see it coming, but like 99.9% of me was shocked. Like this wasn't anything that I could ever picture happening in my head.
Here is where it gets even more complex. So in your interpretations, and this is a very general question,
Yeah.
You can answer this how you want. Do you think your father's a bad person?
I do, yes. Yeah, I do. I had thought about that a lot when I first found out. This might not be the same for everybody, but in my head, it's like, it's a lot different when somebody has child porn of, like 17-year-olds who possibly could look 18. And then there's like toddlers, which is what my dad was looking at. So that's a huge, huge, huge difference in my head. So yeah, I would definitely say that he's a bad person.
Do you know anything about his mother and his father?
I do. I mean, I'm around my grandparents. My grandmother, I mean, nothing really remarkable to say there. She's a great person. I love her to death. Same goes for my grandfather, but there's a little bit of history there. I do know that my grandfather was abusive physically. I don't necessarily know sexually or not. And then I know he has some allegations, or had some allegations regarding child-related, like, sexual abuse. I don't know if those were true or not, whatever happened with those, but I know those were there. But I do know for sure that he was a little physically abusive with all 3 of his sons.
So your dad has 2 brothers?
Yes, he does.
Do you know how your uncles feel about this?
Not really. I mean, one of my uncles is actually like a drug addict. He's not the best person, so I don't really see him a lot. My other uncle, my family's men they're not really ones to like open up and tell you how they feel about anything. So I really don't know how he actually truly feels about it. I know when I first found out, he was very, very apologetic to me because he knew how much this was hurting me. I know that he talks to my dad like on the phone. I know he'll sometimes put money like on his commissary, but I really don't know like how he necessarily feels about it.
So it seems so far that this is the person that can perhaps relate to you the most emotionally, because you both have some sort of blood relation to this person.
Yeah.
Do you think that in the future you and him might start communicating more and maybe even get closer as a result of this, or you're not sure?
I'm not sure. I mean, I honestly really don't see him that much, and I don't talk to him that much. I would say the person I probably talk to the most about it is my mom, and then the second would probably be my grandmother. I don't really foresee us getting like super close. We're not really distant, but we're not really close. Like, we don't talk about our feelings or anything like that with each other. Possibly, but I don't really foresee that happening.
How does your mom feel about it, and your grandmother?
Well, my mom, she was very, very livid when she found out, and she's obviously very disgusted. I know she has a lot of questions regarding like my childhood that she knows that she'll probably never get the answer to. But yeah, I know she's pretty disgusted and pretty mad about it. She'll actually occasionally check on him. Like, they have tablets in there that they message on. And so she'll occasionally check on him just to make sure that he's, still alive. But yeah, very mad. My grandmother, she seems to still support him in a way. Obviously, she thinks what he did is disgusting. Like we all do, but she is kind of just like, he just needs help. In the beginning, she tried to tell me that it was just like a mistake or something like that. But now that she knows that I knew it was toddlers, she's kind of backed down on that stance, and she's more so just like, oh, well, he needs help, but still talking to him, still supporting him.
I think that pedophilia is a very intense topic, and it's all the different philias pertaining to having the need or want to rape a child or hurt a child. So before this happened and after this happened, how has your perspective on it kind of changed?
I mean, before it happened, I really had a very, I think that pedophiles should be in jail for the rest of their life. While I do think that they need help, I think that majority of them deserve to be in jail for the rest of their life. I think there's kind of a spectrum on what's, sort of kind of not acceptable, but less, insane to do. And then there's kind of the other stuff, like raping a child, that I would think deserves to, be in jail for the rest of their life. Now, I would say it definitely has kind of opened my mind to the fact that a lot of people consider it to be like a mental illness, and which part of me agrees with. A lot of people have tried to tell me that, oh, well, if he was abused as a child, that's like an excuse or whatever. I don't think there's any excuse for it. I've been through a lot as a child, and I couldn't ever imagine doing that. I still think that they need help. I think if somebody is in prison for something like this, they need to be in therapy. Because if you're going to end up releasing them back into the world without therapy, nothing's really going to change. Obviously, I don't think all pedophiles deserve to die or anything, because I am kind of realizing that these are people's family, but I really emphasis on the fact that they need help. And I think that's the only way that we could see some progress in that.
I think earlier I was talking about how this is more on the extreme spectrum of something kind of humiliating that somebody that can do, or really just the whole mixture of emotions. I don't think humiliating covers it all. But on a theoretical level, for example, when it comes to genocide, how there are 8 different steps, beginning with dehumanization all the way down to extermination and denial. There is a sequential step or force human behaviors take before they're completely actualized or executed. I definitely think that the same argument or theory or levels of action could be made for assaulting or hurting a child. There is a clear moral issue with doing anything to a child, and I think that any adult knows that. I think that anybody that's actually growing properly as a human can see a moral issue with it in some form. For sure, he was doing something that was immoral by having these pictures and videos. Do you think that he was on his way or getting to a point where he was going to assault a child? Do you think he had that in him?
I actually have no idea, because there were, so in the police report they kind of go over some of the images, just to prove that it was worthy of the charges. And so some of them talked about and described raping young children. So part of me wants to say yes, because I think even again there's a spectrum of regular stuff with young. I don't think there's regular stuff, but there's a difference between non-raping and then raping. Raping is such a violent act. And so, it's my dad. I don't want to think of him being capable of that, but I would say probably, yeah.
Does that make you sad? Does it hurt you? Right now you seem very composed, and I'm sure that, you've thought about it and talked about it so many times, but do you still get that feeling?
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. It's pretty much a daily thing. It's sad. I'm not really going to have my... Yeah, I've kind of basically decided that I'm not going to have a relationship with him. So, obviously, I'm not always composed about it. It definitely has been a very, very, very difficult thing for me to deal with these past few months.
Have you talked to him?
I talked to him once verbally. This was before I found out the ages and the specifics. I talked to him. I think it was Thanksgiving. I was at my grandpa's house, and he had called my uncle And I just kind of felt pressure to talk to him. Like, my whole family was talking to him, and so I did, and it was a surprisingly normal conversation. He started crying at the end of it, but it was just a little bit more normal than I expected it to be. And then I have, like, messaged with him on the messaging thing. But since I found out about the ages, I have had no contact with him whatsoever.
Did he never really brought it up or confronted it with you?
Oh, no. He literally did not talk about it during the phone call. He pled not guilty in court, so obviously there's only a certain amount of stuff he can say. He has, like, admitted it to my grandmother and my mom on that messaging thing, but he really has never talked about it with me. He said, "Oh, I'm so sorry to put you through this," all that stuff, but he has never openly, like, ever talked about it with me.
And you don't have to get into too much specifics, but you were saying that, generally speaking, he had 10 counts of it?
Yeah, it was 10 counts, and so it was 235 files, so, like, either images or videos.
When you had went to go see what he was being accused of, did you look at descriptions of each of these things in detail? Did you read through each and everything, or did you just decide that that was not in your best interest?
Well, so when I first found out, my mom told me, and she told me what the charges were. And so there was only a certain amount of stuff we can see, like, on the website of, like, an inmate search in our county. And so it literally just said, like, it listed possession of child pornography 10 times. And so recently, which is when I made that post about the Ask Me Anything thing, I had just found out about the ages. And so I did that by looking at county court records. And so I actually read through the full arrest report or police report. And so that went through basically the whole internal investigation. So I was able to kind of figure out, like, how did this happen? What was happening behind the scenes? And then it went into describe 10 of the images. And I read through all of those at that time. And I read the full thing about 3 times just to make sure that I wasn't, like, crazy and seeing things, because it was pretty, crazy to read that. And I was in disbelief of it.
And in these 10 descriptions, were they all equally, I mean, it's all already bad, but was it all equally as bad?
No, some were worse than others. Like, it went into, it described everything, but one of the first one that I read, it, like, described the race of the person, but then it literally said toddler. And at that point, like, I don't even know how to describe that feeling. Like, I literally got dizzy reading that, and I read through the rest of them, and I think there were one maybe that was, like, a little bit older, like puberty age, but 9 out of 10 of them were toddler / prepubescent children. So I would say, obviously the ones about raping them were a little bit worse than the other ones, but they're all pretty much equally terrible.
I feel like there's a difference between just an image of, oh God, I don't even know. I feel like it's making me dizzy. Like,
yeah.
Obviously for you on a completely different level, but
like, the police report pretty much went through, like, the timeline of how it happened. So he was up doing this in February to, like, May of 2021, and he didn't get arrested until September of 2022.
Did the police report go through how he got caught?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, it went through everything, the whole timeline.
Do you mind sharing how he got caught? If not, I guess.
In, I think it was March of 2021, the National Organization for Missing and Endangered Children, they sent 3 cyber tips to our local police station. And so, I'm not super technical, so I don't really understand how all of it happened, but they sent those 3 cyber tips. And so our local, like, detectives began to look into it, and so they started with the IP address that was downloading those things, and so they tracked that IP address back to my dad. Through that, they were able to contact the cable company that he used, like the cable and internet company, got his address and his name through there. They continued to kind of investigate, subpoenaed the electrical company and the cable company just for more information. And I believe they did the same to, like, Google and Microsoft. And then so in June of 2022, trying to make sure my timeline's kind of correct, they did a search warrant. They came to his house. I was not there, but they came to his house and they took every, like, electronic device other than, like, TVs that he could have possibly used. That included phones, computers, flash drives, etc. And so at that point, they combed through that until about August. From August, they had their proof, arrested him in September. The police report said that there were three main devices that it was found on. It was his phone, his laptop, and his flash drive. And out of all of them, there were like 235 images or videos. They said that on the computer, there was a folder titled Meeting Presentation, and that whole folder was entirely child porn. And then he also used his special internet browser to get access to the dark web, in which that would like hide his location and stuff like that, or attempted to. And I mean, he still ended up getting caught, but he definitely did try to hide it. Like I said, he was in IT. He's been working in IT since I was like alive. So he knew how to hide it, but I'm just assuming it just wasn't good enough. So
been able to ask him directly about this, right?
No.
And do you think there'll ever come a point where you want to do that?
Partly yes and partly no, because I've already kind of made up my mind that I don't want a relationship with him in the future. But there are a lot of questions that I have that he could only answer. So I think it would be nice to get answers to those. I don't think it will be anytime soon, because he has lied about it for a while, even while he's been in jail. He tried to tell me that it was just a one-time thing, or he just stumbled across it, when in reality he was trying his best to hide it, and it was over months at a time. So I would like to ask, but it's going to be years before I can, so...
You said that your mother was just angry when she found out, and I know you said that you kind of put it together that it made sense. Did your mom see this coming at all, since I guess she must have been the closest person to him at one point?
No, she was shocked when she found out. I think multiple people have asked her, did you ever see this coming? Did you have any sense? And she had no idea. She was shocked when she found out.
I mean, the facts are simply that, your father is, and I'm just stating it because it's a strong sentence, and I think it puts into perspective a lot. To the listeners, it'll put in a lot of perspective, is that your father is a pedophile. He clearly has an attraction to children. Does this make your childhood memories different for you?
No. Not necessarily. It's created a lot of questions in my head over, did he ever look at me like that when I was a kid? Just questions like that. But I don't have a ton of childhood memories to begin with, but also not a lot with my dad. So not really. It hasn't really affected that part, at least yet.
So in court, are you hoping that he is found guilty or that he is found innocent?
Well, I actually just got a text from my mother. So in court, they've been trying to get a plea deal, so it's not even going to trial. He pled not guilty originally, but he actually just signed for 4 years in prison, and then another 5 on probation with no access to internet or anything like that. So, it won't go to trials. I obviously don't really have a hope either way. He's going to prison. She just texted me 2 minutes ago about it. So yeah, they did a plea deal, so it's not even going to go to trial. So I guess he had to plead guilty, change his plea to guilty for that deal.
I was visibly surprised when you said only, 5 years, 4 years?
Yeah, it was 4 years and then 5 years of probation.
Were you expecting more?
Yeah, so I actually have my great uncle. So my mom's uncle works for the state attorney's office. And when he looked into it, just because I was like, what should I expect? I want to prepare myself. He told me that if it were to go to trial, he could be looking at 15 years max per charge. So I had fully prepared myself to never see my dad again outside of prison. So this is a hell of a lot better than what he could have gotten.
Does that make you happy or angry? Because that's a lot, right?
I'm angry because I don't think that 4 years is enough. I'm happy because, he might be able to see his parents before they die, my grandparents, because I want that for my grandparents because they have a completely different perspective than I do. So I'm happy in that sense, but I don't think 4 years is enough. And I think that, the whole situation pisses me off because he's been throwing himself a pity party since the whole thing happened. So the fact that they were going to do 5 originally, so the fact that he tried to argue the 5 and not just take it like, a man, because he did the crime, it does kind of piss me off, if that makes any sense.
That's very fair. The most that you could hope for, I think, is if somebody is caught doing something, especially that, you just own up to it. That gives some type of solace to the people around them, at least. That.
Yes.
But here it seems as though this is not exactly forthcoming, or the reaction that you'd want. How did your step-siblings feel about this?
So I wasn't close with my step-siblings to begin with, because I obviously wasn't close to my stepmom, being that she was pretty verbally abusive towards me. So in between like June and September, I didn't know that there was a search warrant that had been performed at the house. He had only told my stepmom and my grandma. So I was completely unaware that this had even happened in June. But knowing what I know now, I found out that one of my stepbrothers actually spray painted my dad's brand new truck, and he spray painted pedophile on it. So that's about as much as I know. Obviously, like anybody, was pretty mad about it. But that's pretty much all I know regarding them.
Now, when you think of your father, do you think pedophile? Do you think dad? Or do you think monster? Or do you think what is the word that comes to mind for the person that he is?
Oh yeah, I think pedophile completely.
Do you hope that can change someday?
I do, not for his sake, but for mine, because I don't want to be angry about this the rest of my life. And so yeah, I hope that can change. Do I expect it to? Not really. I do hope that it might be able to change eventually.
For anybody else who is going through or has gone through a situation where somebody that they know commits something that's like as grave as this, like murder, rape, possession of child pornography, or even worse, raping or touching a child, what advice or what thoughts could you give them?
I would definitely say use your support system, because for a little bit I kind of completely shut down regarding the whole thing, and that was one of the worst things I could do. As harsh as it sounds, get yourself into therapy. Because whether some people think it or not, it's a very, very traumatic thing to go through. And I mean, I guess it does depend on like how this person was related to you, but get yourself into therapy either way, because it definitely helps. And I think anybody who goes through this definitely needs it. And like my main thing is I blamed myself a lot of the time. I would go through and think, oh, is it my genetics? Is it, why did I not know, etc., etc. But that's a bad road to go down, so I try to tell people don't go down that road, because that's a hard one.
Do you have any advice for the listener on how to approach life in general, you might think?
I don't know, because I fully haven't figured it out myself. It's hard. It's a very hard thing to go through, especially with it being such a prominent like parent figure in my life. I mean, my therapist has pretty much told me, like, you basically go through the stages of grief because you're losing a parent. That's not who I thought my dad ever was. Like, I'm losing the idea of who I thought my dad was. And I think one piece of advice I could say is just let yourself feel, like you said, feel all those emotions, and it's also not a linear thing, just like when you're actually losing somebody, if somebody died, it's not a linear thing. You're going to feel angry one day and then sad the other, and that'll flip-flop, and it'll be a whole roller coaster of emotions. But I mean, like you said, you can only really just let yourself feel those things to try to eventually heal from it. In a way, I mean, I will say that this has definitely like shaped my life probably forever. So in a way, but I'm not really looking at myself any differently. I mean, this did happen. But that's my dad. My dad did this. I had no part in it. It has nothing to do with me. And so I'm still the same person. I think I've just gone through a lot more now. And I think it definitely has helped me grow as a person and kind of open my mind to a lot of things that I didn't know before.